Kurt Vonnegut, do you have an audience in mind as you write?
Well, that's what my new book is about. Yes, I have an audience of one in mind, and that is how artistic unity is achieved, I think, is by writing for one person or by painting for one person or perhaps by designing a building for one person. I think that is the secret of artistic unity.
Who is the one person?
Well, there was a psychiatrist named Edmund Bergler who's written a great deal about writers. He's dead now. He was a New York psychiatrist who specialized in treating the ailments of writers. I don't know how many of them he psychoanalyzed, but he was the writer's psychiatrist. And he just said this as an aside in his book, is that every writer has a single person from his or her past for whom he or she writes. He didn't think this was particularly useful therapeutically. He thought it was merely curious. And it's what I say in the introduction to my new book, which is Slapstick, is that I wrote for my sister, who died many years ago, and the book is partly about how she finally faded away, and now I find she no longer exists to write for, but I did hang on to her for a while.
I'm reminded a little bit of something that the psychiatrist R.D. Laing said. He said, "My first patients were my parents."
Well, I am not sympathetic to Laing, and perhaps you know why. Is my son went insane and wrote a book about it, and is wholly recovered now, and feels very hostile toward Laing.
That's Mark.
Yes.
Why does he feel hostile to Laing?
Well, because of what Mark calls the poetry of schizophrenia, is that there's an awful lot that can be said which is enchanting and probably true about schizophrenia, but none of it has the least clinical usefulness. It is simply conversation about schizophrenia, which can be marvelous in its own right. But before he went crazy, he ran a commune. Well, he's written about it, but he ran a commune north.
What was the name of his book again?
The Eden Express. Anyway, they had many cult books in their commune there, and R.D. Laing's books were among those cult books. And Mark should really argue against R.D. Laing. I will simply say that he found R.D. Laing's theories misleading to people dealing with actual illness, which he had to do as the patient himself.
But it's interesting because it really reflects on your writing, because what we're talking about here is the perception of reality. And certainly in your books, Slaughterhouse-Five being an example that comes to my mind recently, there is a drift in and out of what we, the reader, would call objective reality. There is a swinging back and forth in time that doesn't adhere to to conventional ideas of reality.
Well, I think it does it. I think anyone who has reached my age, which is 54, is saying to himself, I can't possibly be this old. And, when I get to be 60, a terrible mistake has been made, because obviously I was just 8 years old yesterday, or at least 23. And so this is a reflection of human reality, I believe. I think most people find life astonishing, and one thing we learn in school and learn in the Boy Scouts and in the Army and everything is how not to respond to this astonishment, to pretend to be unastonished. And the less astonished you seem, the more mature you appear, and more suitable for promotion to a responsible position in society.
Well, let's say I understand, based on what you said, how one can jumble up and reorder experiences of the present and the past. But how does the future get in there? And you also deal in the future.
I'm writing a piece now for the for the Washington Post, as they asked me to write a futuristic piece 100 years from now. And when I make that projection in my own head, with the information I have now, I have no information from the future, I see desolation. that is just the nature of my mind and not the nature of the future. And I do not propose to submit this to the Washington Post, as I'm going to have to fool around with a story until it is not so desolate. Otherwise, I'll misrepresent the future and only represent my own state of mind. So no, I can't see in the future, and I don't. All science fiction, I think, is dealing with the past anyway. What has happened?
Science fiction, right? Now, I was going to ask you about that. You have been classified as a writer of science fiction. Is that fair? Do you welcome it?
Well, it's simply a way of storing books in a bookstore or a library. I complained about it. I wrote an essay years ago in which I complained about the classification because critics would not take science fiction books seriously, and the pay was a lot lower. The science fiction writers were lower class, a stratified society, and they were very close to the bottom. Therefore, I was poorer than I thought I needed to be, and I wanted to get out of this particular ghetto and up where the respect was and up where the money was. That's my only complaint. The science fiction writers treasure the ghetto and hold it together, most of them.
It's a cult, of course, and
well,
they're proud of it.
They know each other.
But Kurt Vonnegut is his own cult right now, if you look at the patterns of book buying.
But the real science fiction writers are part of an extended family, as they correspond a lot. They see each other a lot. They go to conventions. They have a hell of a good time. And I've never been part of that world. Also, I didn't grow up as they did. Most of them grew up reading pulps, and I somehow never did. And so when they talk about gorgeous stories that appeared in Astounding Fiction in 1938, I just didn't read those stories back then, and so can't enter into the conversation.
Well, maybe what you're writing can be better classified as fantasies than science fiction.
Well, I'm better trained in science than a hell of a lot of science fiction writers. As I was trained as a chemist, and then we're talking in Chicago, as I took a master's degree in anthropology here. My roots are in anthropology more than anything else. So I do have a scientific background, which many science fiction writers don't. Also, I was a publicity man for the General Electric Research Laboratory for several years, and so I have got a pretty good science background, and my brother, older by 8 years, is a distinguished physicist. He's Dr. Bernard Vonnegut, and his most famous discovery is that silver iodide can sometimes make it snow and rain, but he has done some far more lovely and subtle things
than that.
Yes.
Seeding the cloud. Why is it, and maybe you're not the right person to ask this question, but why is it that you are so popular among university students?
I don't know. I've answered this question before, but someone else really ought to answer it. That's what critics are for, is I didn't think in terms of capturing a particular market, so I have no idea how this particular market was captured. I do sell extraordinarily well in college bookstores, and an awful lot of it, I think, is probably fashion. And fashions will change, and my vogue will disappear slowly, I hope.
In universities as a specialty, anyway.
Yeah. But that isn't where the bulk of my sales are. I mean, my sales are quite general. I was number one on the bestseller list for about 4 months with Breakfast of Champions, which expresses a very broad sale, very broad audience. I think I deal with sophomoric questions.
Would you say something about that? That's very interesting.
Yeah, because mature people do not deal with sophomoric questions.
Such as?
What happens after you die? Where were we before we were born? What does God want? Is there a God? What is he like? All the adults pretend all these matters are settled, and I find them endlessly interesting. In the new book, I describe heaven, a heaven. And I've started another book, and that one is set in a different sort of heaven, as I'm still speculating about, well, for instance, what sort of an afterlife would really suit human beings. Well, these are sophomoric, immature questions which all grown-ups have settled.
Well, the heavy overlay of irony to what you're saying, obviously, you do feel that that the questions do deserve some of our mature reflection.
They're entertaining. They deserve our reflection because they are terribly entertaining. That's the same reason we have the primary system, which has obsessed us for the past 6 weeks. It's terribly entertaining. It's all that's going on. It's a fascinating sport for a short time, and it's entertaining life. My God, as old as I am, I've had sophomore conversations after a few drinks about what the best state in the union is.
Which is it, by the way?
Well, it's surprising that night. Pennsylvania won, and everybody was startled. But it turned out that people really liked those forests and those modest hills and the valleys and all that.
I said a moment ago that there is such a thing as a Kurt Vonnegut cult. And as a guess, I'd say that you probably have ambivalent feelings toward that cult. What is the difference, or is there any, between the way you're perceived by your reading public and the way you'd like to be perceived, or the way you perceive yourself as a writer?
Well, the only problem that's come up has to do with the volume of my mail. Is people really don't make great demands on me. I no longer make public appearances. My public appearances haven't been great successes. People have been somewhat disappointed in me in person. One surprising expectation is that I'm short, that I must write short. And at West Point, I had a cadet come up to me and say, "You can't possibly have written those books." I said, "Why not?" And they thought about it. He said, "You're too tall."
If there's somebody listening out there who doesn't know your books, is there any particular one that you would suggest that he start with?
Well, I would be very happy to have him or her start with Sirens of Titan, I guess, because it was more pleasant for me to write than anything else, and I would hope it was the most pleasant book to read on that account, and it might be entertaining for someone else. No, most of the mail I get, of course, it's from strange people who read me, but the letters customarily say, "I've read everything you've written," which would actually take about 2 hours and a half. And
Not true, by the way, but anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, people seem to read all of my books, at least college kids do, which is a very cheerful circumstance for me, as I'm very fortunate in my publisher, who has seen fit to keep me completely in print, as every book I ever wrote is available in both paperback and hardcover. I know of no other American author whose publisher has been that generous to you.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons that you're so popular is that you have a terrific talent for titles. Your titles are very grabby. Breakfast of Champions, Slaughterhouse-Five, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, Cat's Cradle. They're very unusual. They don't sound like other titles.
Well, that's nice. The only things the only writings of mine that have ever been changed have been my titles. It's from the beginning, when I wrote for Collier's and the Saturday Evening Post and so forth. No one ever changed a word except for the titles. So perhaps I've matured as a writer now, as people no longer change my titles.
Well, which of these titles that I was mentioning, which of them have been tampered with?
None of the book titles, as many short story titles as the short stories in Welcome to the Monkey House, which were written mostly for slick magazines, all had titles invented by either Collier's or the Saturday Evening Post.
What was your relatively recent book of essays? I don't think I can pronounce that offhand.
Yeah, well, that was Wampeters, Foma, and Grand Falloons. These are all coined words.
I can imagine the look on the face of the publishing house when you presented them with that title. They must have said, "Well, we'll never move this."
No, as I have a very close relationship to my publisher, Sam Lawrence, and he thought it would be okay, and indeed it was. As the book was published under that title in England, too, as a British publisher didn't complain. So enough people had read Cat's Cradle, from which those words are taken, to guarantee a fairly decent sale.
Yeah. Now, at the beginning of Slaughterhouse-Five, you say that most of this happened in a sort of a way. And I'm wondering whether, to what extent that applies to the rest of your works.
Well, I've limited myself to locations I've actually seen. It's basically Indianapolis, Schenectady, New York City, Dresden during the Second World War. I can't be credited with a great geographical imagination. Maybe I'm imaginative as far as events go, but not as far as places go. And anyone who cares to check it out will find out I really haven't traveled very much and haven't seen one hell of a lot, despite how long I've lived.
Let me end with a very highfalutin question for which I apologize in advance, but do you have a grand design? Are you aiming at something?
Well, every writer is like a knight on a quest. I just got born, and suddenly I'm 54 years old, and I really don't know where the hell I'm going, as I hope I get somewhere, but I remember how I felt about J.D. Salinger when he was publishing regularly in the New Yorker. There was great excitement, and I wanted to ask Salinger, where are you going, where are you going, where are you going? And it's like asking a knight errant, where are you going, what are you going to find, where are you going to find the Holy Grail, what's it going to be like? He doesn't know. He's simply out questing, and I'm out questing. No, if I'm no withholder of information in my books, as whatever I know, I put as close to the first of the book as possible, and if I stumbled on something,
get it down before you forget it.
Yes, if I find the Holy Grail, I will publish colored pictures of it immediately.